So you guys watched the day a good man stops giving everything away is the day his entire life changes, yeah? I'm going to expand on that a little bit more for you guys. I'm not talking about becoming cold or selfish. I'm talking about the moment that he finally understands that the one person he has abandoned the longest is himself. And that's not fair.
Every man has a breaking point, and it's the moment his entire life shifts for the better. Not because he stops loving his family, not because he becomes selfish, but because he finally wakes up. Most men tie their identity to being needed, but that pressure destroys them silently. A good man spends years carrying everybody else, his kids, his partner, his parents, but the same man often forgets the only person he can't replace, himself.
There's a moment no one prepares you for. It doesn't come with fireworks, no dramatic confrontation, no slamming doors. It's quieter than that. It's a Tuesday or a Thursday, some ordinary day when a man wakes up, goes through the motion, and somewhere between his second cup of coffee and checking his email, something just shifts. He looks at the person asking for more of his time, more of his money, more of his energy. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, he hears a voice in his head that says, "What about me?" And instead of immediately feeling guilty for thinking that, he doesn't. That's the moment. That's the day a man finally chooses himself. I'm not talking about becoming cold. I'm not talking about selfishness. I'm talking about the moment a man finally understands that the one person that he's abandoned the longest is himself. And that's not fair. For years, most men build their entire identity over being needed, being the provider, being the rock, being the one that absorbs all the chaos so everyone else can breathe. I've seen it more times than I can count. A good man would carry everything alone and carry everyone else with him, his kids, his partner, his parents, his job, his responsibilities. And he'll do it quietly. He won't complain. He won't ask for praise. He won't even ask for help. He'll just keep giving, keep providing, keep showing up. And that's exactly why he breaks, because you can only pour from an empty cup for so long before life forces you to face the emptiness. Research from the New England Research Institute found that 66% of married men rely on their wives as their primary source of support. 66%. Only 21% rely on other people, and then the 10% has no one at all. Think about what that means. For 2/3 of married men, their entire emotional infrastructure runs through one person. Every struggle, every fear, every moment where they need someone to just listen. Their wife isn't their only partner. She's their therapist, their best friend, their only confidant, and their entire support system wrapped into one. And most of them don't even realize it until something goes wrong. A 2023 study published in PLOS1 tracked nearly 1 million people in Denmark to understand what happens when someone loses their spouse. In the year after losing a wife, men were 70% more likely to not make it than similarly aged men who didn't lose a spouse. 70%. For women who lost their husbands, 27%. That's not a gap, that's a canyon. Harvard tracked over 12,000 married people for up to 23 years. During that time, about 1,400 men lost their wives. 30% of the bereaved men didn't survive the study period. For women who lost husbands, 15%, doubled the rate. And it wasn't about being older or sicker. Healthy men who lost a wife were 2.1 times more likely to follow than healthy men who remained married. Being healthy didn't protect them. Nothing protected them except having their wife still alive. That's how deep this dependency runs. Now, hold that in your mind, because a man can be completely dependent on someone who doesn't depend on him at all. He could be pouring everything into a relationship, his time, his energy, his entire emotional capacity, while receiving almost nothing back. And he won't notice.
Because for years, most men built their entire identity around being needed, being the provider, being the rock, being the one who absorbs all of the chaos so everybody else can breathe and relax. Again, not fair. I've watched it more times than I can count. I've seen it with my clients, in my family, with men in my own life, and I've saw it firsthand with my husband long before we ever built anything together. A good man will carry everything alone and carry everyone else with him, his kids, his partner, his parents, his job, his responsibilities, and he'll do it quietly. He won't complain. He won't ask for praise. He won't ask for help. He will just keep giving and keep providing and keep leading.
Because he's been trained to believe that giving is his job, that receiving is something other people do. Social psychology researchers call it reciprocity imbalance. It's what happens when one person consistently gives more than they get. And failed reciprocity doesn't just hurt feelings. It erodes trust. It weakens support. Research shows that it can actually increase the probability of stress-related diseases. Your body keeps score of what your relationship costs you, even when your mind won't. So what actually happens before a man chooses himself? He doesn't wake up one day and decide to be selfish. That's not how it works. What happens is slow, almost invisible. He picks up the slack when someone else drops the ball. He covers the bill when no one else offers to split it. He shows up when he says he would, even when the other person doesn't. And every time he does this, something gets reinforced. The pattern deepens. The expectation solidifies. He becomes the reliable one, the dependable one, the guy you can always count on. And nobody tells him. Every time he shows up without asking for anything back, he trains the people around him to believe that's just who he is, that he doesn't have needs, that his cup never empties. So they stop checking. They stop asking how he's doing. They stop offering anything in return, not because they're bad people, because he taught them that he doesn't need it. I heard a story recently that stuck with me. A man spent 6 months helping his friends through a divorce, drove 2 hours every weekend just to check on them, helped them move, listened to the same story over and over and over. He never complained. He never asked for anything in return. Then, one day, this man's father got sick. Like really sick. He called that same friend just needing someone to talk to, just needing 20 minutes. The friend said he was busy. Could they talk next week? That was it. That was the moment. Not rage, not an explosion. Just a quiet click, like a door closing that would never open again. Sometimes it's a single moment like that. Sometimes it's smaller. Someone takes credit for work he did. Someone cancels plan that he arranged his whole schedule for. Someone asks for yet another favor without once asking how he's doing. Usually it's not one thing. It's the accumulation of thousands of small things. It's realizing that no matter how he gives, it's never acknowledged, never enough, never reciprocated. It's understanding finally that his constant availability trained everyone around him to believe his needs do not exist. One man put it this way: I woke up one day and realized that if I disappeared tomorrow, the people around me would mourn the loss of what I did for them, not the loss of me. That's the moment when you realize you've been a ghost in your own story.
For some men, that wake-up call comes through as betrayal. For others, it's divorce. Some is a financial hardship, a health scare, a moment where everything they thought they were standing on disappears. I've talked to many clients on Zoom calls crying because they've lost everything except their own heartbeat. And the thing that hits them the hardest isn't the loss of themselves. It's the realization that they never invested into themselves this entire time. That's when the question changes. It's no longer, what do I need to do for everyone else? It becomes, what do I need to do for me now? And that is the moment when a man's life shifts from survival into leadership. He starts investing in his health instead of waiting around until he's falling apart. He starts building discipline instead of building excuses. He starts choosing a mission, not just a paycheck. And he starts consuming better information, not the noise that numbs him. His priorities change. His posture changes. His energy changes. Everything about him changes because he is waking up. He finally becomes a man who understands that if his happiness depends on anybody else, he's fragile. If that woman leaves, if that job collapses, if those people stop needing him, his entire identity vanishes. That's why most men are exhausted, not because they're weak, but because they've built their lives on dependency instead of identity. I watched this with my husband when we first met. He never chased validation. He never lived for approval. He had a mission, a purpose, and was extremely grounded in himself as a man.
When you understand that people around you don't actually see you, they see what you provide, what you produce, what you're useful for. And nobody tells you what that moment actually feels like if it doesn't feel triumphant. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like grief. Because when you finally choose yourself, you're also letting go of the version of yourself that believed that enough sacrifices would eventually earn love, earn respect, earn recognition. You're mourning the realization that some people were never going to value you. They were just going to use you until there was nothing left. And that hurts. It's supposed to hurt. But on the other side of that grief is something else. Something that might feel unfamiliar if you spent your whole life performing for others. Peace. Not happiness necessarily. Not excitement. Just peace. The quiet that comes when you stop running on a treadmill that was never going anywhere. Now, let's talk about what happens after. Because when a man finally chooses himself, the world doesn't throw him a parade. The people around him don't say they understand. The opposite usually happens. The people who benefited from his self-sacrifice, they call it betrayal. They call it selfishness. They call it abandonment. Because to them, his self-neglect was normal. It was the arrangement. It was what they signed up for. And when he stops being infinitely available, infinitely accommodating, infinitely giving, they don't think he's finally taking care of himself. They think he's changed. They think he's become cold. They think he's broken some unspoken promise that he never actually made. You used to be so reliable. What happened to the guy who always showed up? You've become so selfish lately. As if choosing himself after years of choosing everyone else is some kind of character flaw. Some people won't adjust. Some relationships were only held together by his willingness to sacrifice. When that changes, those relationships reveal themselves for what they always were. And that hurts. But it's also information. It tells you who was there for you and who was there for what you could do. The more you give, the more taking anything back looks like theft. But a man who chooses himself doesn't lose people. He loses the wrong people, and he attracts the right ones. There's a difference between a man who needs someone and a man who chooses someone. One comes from insecurity, the other comes from identity. And when a man starts creating his own peace, his own discipline, his own sense of worth, the love he brings becomes steady, intentional, rooted. Not because he fears losing someone, but because he finally knows who he is without them. That's what happens when you build identity instead of dependency. That's the man who becomes dangerous in the best possible way. Not reckless, rooted, not reactive, intentional, not desperate, disciplined. Choosing yourself doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean abandoning responsibilities or people who genuinely need you. It means learning the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction, between being there for people and being used by people, between generosity and erasure. It means recognizing that your needs aren't an afterthought. They're not something to get to once everyone else is taken care of. They're fundamental. They're valid. They exist. And meeting them isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a basic requirement for being human. The day a man finally chooses himself, he doesn't become a different person. He becomes the person he was before the world convinced him that his value wasn't useful. Before he accepted that his needs were negotiable, but everyone else were mandatory. Before he internalized the lie that exhaustion was just the price of admission for being a man. He comes back to himself, sometimes for the first time since childhood. And the world might not understand it. The people around him might resist the change. Some relationships might not survive it. But he will, and that might be the first time that's ever been the priority. If you're watching this and you're not there yet, that's okay. This isn't a process you can rush. It's not something you can force before you're ready. But know this. The guilt you feel when you imagine putting yourself first, that's not evidence that you're selfish. That's evidence of how deeply you've been conditioned to believe your needs don't matter. And the fact that you're even watching this video, thinking about this possibility, something's already shifting. The moment is coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not this month. But one day, you're going to wake up. You're going to see someone asking for more than an ever given. And for the first time in your life, you're going to hear that voice. What about me? And you're going to listen. That's the day a man finally chooses himself. And when it comes, it's not the end of anything. It's the first time you've ever actually been here, present, whole, yours. It's been your girl, Rene here. I'll see you guys in my next video.